So, because my belief system is, listen, if you want to be in the mob, or you want to be associated with the mob, you know, if you do X, Y, and Z, A, B, C might happen to you. You know what I mean? So, you know, you gotta, you know, you have to follow the rules, and the rules are, you know, you don't beat up wise guys' wives or mothers. So in the 70s, I used to run around with Neil's son, Buddy, Croce. Neil was the underboss of the Gambino family. I was very, very tight with his brother. We were hanging out with this guy named Louis Baja. He was a Puerto Rican kid. He was a big coke dealer, and he was a friend of ours, and he was hanging out with us. And he started dating Tony, and Neil found out. But he was doing it on the sneak, because I told him to stay away from her. He was told to stay away from Tony. Basically, we all told him to stay the fuck away from her. It's Neil's daughter, you know, stay away from her. And he didn't listen, you know, so he told my father what's going on, and my father goes, okay, we'll take care, you know, we'll take care of it. So we were setting up Louis Baja to be murdered, and what happened was we owned a bar. My brother and I owned a bar in Ozone Park called Mar Benny's, and one night he was in there, Louis, about 2 weeks before we were actually going to do it, and he was in there, and two of my friends that knew what we were going to do to Louis Baja were in there with Louis, and they thought they could like impress my father. So it was raining out, so they took Louis Baja out of the bar and they shot him in the head, but he didn't die.
All right, so as many of you know, I was recently on tour with Michael Francis, and he spoke very highly about Anthony. Anthony has been on his channel. He's been on DJ Vlad's channel. I've watched all his stuff, and it's going to be an epic podcast with some mind-blowing stories. So first off, huge thank you guys, Anthony and Bruno, for being with us today. And we like to start out in the thick of the action rather than just going back to where you grew up and all that stuff. And the story that stuck out to me the most was, it was like a scene straight out of The Godfather, was how your brother-in-law was executed. Are you okay to take the viewers down that path first, please, Anthony?
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, it's a big part of my story. I mean, it changed my life, actually. Not at that time, many years later, actually, it changed my life. Yeah, you know, my brother-in-law, Frankie, his nickname was Kiki. He was a tough kid. You know, he was from the neighborhood. His parents came from Italy. He was an armored truck robber. He had a partner named Peter Sicaro, who was also another dangerous kid. And, you know, they were mobbed up. They did some time for armored truck robberies. They committed a few homicides together. And they were two dangerous kids. And my sister started dating him. And at that time, when she started dating him, Danny Marino, who was a captain in the Gambino family, came to see us and advised me that to have my sister not socialize with him because he's a bad kid, and tell my sister to stay away from him. So I told my mother and my sister what Danny said, but my sister, she didn't want to hear it, and she continued dating him. And eventually they got married. He introduced her to drugs. They started doing some drugs together. And like I said, he was a dangerous kid. So then at one point, my sister became pregnant, and they had a baby. I was actually in treatment at the time because I had a little problem with cocaine, and I was addressing my issues. I was in a treatment center, and my sister had a baby shower, and the next morning I called up my wife, who lived upstairs, because we lived upstairs from my mom. My mother lived on the first floor and I was on the second floor. I called up my wife to see Alice, to see how the party went. And she says to me, "You don't know what that son of a bitch did. I heard screaming last night, and I ran downstairs. He was choking your mother. She was on the floor." And I said, "What do you mean he was choking my mother?" And she says that he ran up a bar tab for like $700 or $800 after my mother had already paid for the party. And when the owner gave my mother the bar tab, my mother said, "What is this for?" And he said, "Your son-in-law was buying everybody drinks, and he told me to give you the check. So when my mother got home, he confronted her and he attacked my mother, and my wife had to jump on him. She scratched his face in a whole big scene, and then he ran out of the house. So I was, like I said, I was in treatment. So when I got out of treatment, I went right to see my father's partner, Tony Lee, who was a made member of the Gambino family. He was my father's partner because my father was in prison. And I went to see him and I told him, you know, this Frankie beat my mother up. And he says to me, I know. Just like that. He went, I know. I said, what do you mean you know? I said, what do you mean you know? What are we going to do here? And he said, we're going to kill him. And, you know, and that was fine because that's the life that we lived. And I said, all right, you know, so what are we going to do? He said, well, you're going to have to go to visit your father and get permission from your father. He has to okay it because we're going to put it on record because, you know, Dominic's going to do it. He wanted Dominic to get credit for it because Dominic was proposed and I was proposed. It's funny how in the mob there's protocols to commit a murder. I mean, because it's a sanctioned thing, it's work, it's part of what you do. So you have to get permission, you have to put it on record, it has to go to the boss, and the boss eventually has to okay it, because if they don't okay it and you do it anyway, then you know your life on the line, because you know homicides bring heat and it's a whole big procedure. So the first step was I had to go visit my father. So I went to visit my father and I told him what happened. And he says to me, what does he think, I'm dead? So I said, no, he don't care. You know, he's a bad kid. He just don't care. You know, I don't know what he thinks. So I told my father what the plan was and he said, do it. And he okayed it. So I went back to New York and I told Tony Lee my father okayed it. And at that point, my father, Tony Lee, sent for John Gotti, who was a captain at the time of the Gambino family. And we told Jeannie what happened. And Jeannie said, okay, I'll go tell my brother. And he went to John, who was the boss, John Gotti. And the next day or a day later, Jeannie came back and he told us his brother okayed it. And his brother, you know, was very close with it. John was very close to us. You know, we have a different relationship with him. We knew him when he was a kid. He really loved my mother and he loved my father, of course. And so he okayed it. And then we put a plan together. And you want me to explain the plan?
Yeah, on this channel, we like to get as much detail as possible. Some of our guests, they say, I'm going to cut a long story short. And I'm like, no, make it long.
Yeah, so you know, like I said, he was a dangerous kid. It couldn't have been like we couldn't just roll up on him on a street corner and gun him down in the street like you see on TV. You know, he was a dangerous kid. He really had to be done. We had to really reel him in and make him feel comfortable because, you know, he was a killer, you know, he was dangerous. I mean, and so we put a plan in place where he was a thief. We knew he was an armored truck robber. Like I said, he was an armed robber. That was basically his thing. He was a thief. So we planned, we told him that Tony Lee knew of a safe house of drug money in South Ozone Park. We don't know how much money was in there, but we know that it's where the drug dealers keep their money. So we told him that, and then we told him Tony wanted to explain it to him, and then we sent for this guy Tommy who had a boat, and after the murder they were going to take his body out on a boat and dispose of him in the Atlantic Ocean. So what happened was we told him about this score, that we had a safe house that had money, and Tony Lee wanted to speak to him. So I called him up the day before and I said, listen, Tony Lee wants to meet you tomorrow morning at Cafe Liberty. He wants to tell you what's going on with that situation I told you about. He said, all right. So that morning I picked him up. You know, it's funny, you know, when I talk about it, because actually it didn't even faze me back then, you know, like I picked him up and he came out of the house and he had shorts on and a t-shirt. And he got in my car, you know, we laughed, he kissed me on the cheek, hello, and, you know, and I'm sitting there with him and I'm driving this guy to his death, like, you know, like it was like the sun was out, it was a hot June day out, you know, he had shorts on and a t-shirt, and I drove him to Cafe Liberty, and when I pulled up, Tony Lee's brother, who was another soldier in the Gambino family, Mikey Gal, he was sitting outside waiting for us. And we got out of the car and I walked across the street and Mikey got up off the chair and he came over and he hugged Frankie and he kissed him. Hello, I'm happy to see you. Another guy knew he was going to die. And, you know, I wasn't nervous up to that point. I was pretty calm up to that point because my part in it was really important because I had to bring him there. So I had to stay like really calm and I couldn't like let my hand be known because if he had any kind of inkling, you know, like anything could have happened. So my job getting him there was to keep him calm and, you know, keep him, you know, so I got him there and I didn't feel anything until I walked in the door and he was in front of me and he walked in and Mikey was on the outside and the door locked from the outside and the door closed and I heard Mikey lock the door. He didn't hear the door lock, but I did. And when I heard the door lock, I got a little nervous at that point. You know, I got a little nervous. And when I walked in, there was 3 people at the bar. There was a counter. It was this guy, Freddie, who later on became a soldier in the Gambino family. This guy, Dominic Pizzoni, Skinny Dom, who's now a captain in the Gambino family, and Tony Lee. And they had a dish with bagels on it and coffee, and they were eating bagels. And we walked in. You know, they all saw Frankie, they hugged him, they kissed him, hello, oh, we're glad to see you, this and that, blah, blah, blah. You want a bagel? And he said, no. And Tony says, all right, come in the back. I want to show you my garden. Because in the back of the club, Tony Lee had a big vegetable garden. He had a green thumb, Tony Lee. And so we went back there, you know, he took it was like a scene in a movie, really. He took a paper bag and he walked out into the back and he was picking tomatoes and putting them in the paper bag and just talking to Frankie about how, you know, just bullshitting to Frankie, not about anything important, just regular chit chat. And he was put a couple of tomatoes in the paper bag and he goes, here, bring these home, you know, for you and Francine, who was my sister. And he handed Frankie the bag. As we walked out of the garden, we got back into the back of the club, and as we were walking, Tony Lee grabbed Frankie by the hand and said, I want to talk to you. And I just kept on walking. And Frankie stopped, and I walked out to the front. And when I walked out to the front, I looked at Dominic, and I gave Dominic the nod. And Dominic reached underneath the countertop, and he took out a revolver, and he put it behind his back, and he walked into the back. And then I just heard pop, 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 pop. I just heard a couple of shots. And then I looked and I saw Frankie laying on the floor and Dominic came out and he said, and he looked at me and he goes, this fucking guy don't want to die. And he put more bullets in the gun and he went back in. And then as I was looking, I saw Dominic just pop, pop, shot him a couple of more times. And then he came out and I worked my father had a big number office, like a lottery office. It was illegal, like a bookmaking type thing, but it was numbers. And I worked in the office during the day. And we walked out and Tony says to me, just to go to work, make out nothing happened, go to work, and then I'll come see you tonight. And I left. I went to do my regular routine, and they took his body and they put it in a sleeping bag, which I had bought the day before, and they put him in the trunk of Dominic's car. So I went to work that day, and then a couple hours later, my sister called me to tell me Frankie never came home. Where is he? I said, I don't know. I dropped him off on the corner. He made a phone call, and I don't know where the hell he is. So I had to go by our house, and I went by our house that night, and his parents were there, and I actually took his father to go. I mean, this is how insane the mob is, right? I actually took his father that night to go look for him, knowing that he was in the trunk of the car. So I took him, and then the next day, I wasn't on the boat, but Tony Lee, you know, I knew what the next day they took him on this guy Tommy's boat, and they took him out into the Atlantic Ocean, and they wrapped him up, and Tony Lee punctured his lungs and cut open his stomach because they didn't want him to float up to the top, and they threw him in the ocean, and he's never been found. He hasn't been found. I mean, they never found his body, and then that was in '88, and then in '05 I got indicted for the murder.
All right, Anthony, we've got a few questions on this story then, because it is one of the most fascinating stories that's ever been told on this channel. I'm interested in getting a bit more detail. So when you're leading him to his death, how fine-tuned do you have to be into his senses, and you know, how fine-tuned do you have to be to detect any slight little change in his attitude to what's going on?
Well, first of all, when I got in the car, I made sure he had no weapons on him, and he didn't. And how I knew that is because of the way he was dressed. He had just a little white T-shirt on with shorts on, shoes, no socks. So I knew he had no weapons on him. So that right away was good. Yeah, I had to be fine-tuned because I mean I had to bring him there no matter what. I couldn't like say even if I picked up on something, I would have had to get him there and then had to some way let them know that something's up. But as long as I stood calm and I just act naturally, everything would go smooth. And I could tell by his expression, he underestimated me. That's what it was. And I knew that. I knew he underestimated. I knew he felt that I wasn't maybe. And then I'm not saying this, I'm not proud of it. I'm just saying, I think he didn't think I was capable of that because he thought he was a tough guy and everything. So I think he sort of underestimated me. So it made my job a little easier, if that makes sense. And so I know as long as I stood calm and just carried on a normal conversation with him, I had him. And that's what happened. And I had him and I brought him there and I walked him in.
Bruno?
Yeah, that was a very good question, Sean. I have a second part to that. So he had to know what he did, you know what I mean, prior. So by him being hypersensitive and you kind of giving him the laid back attitude, going on the boat, doing whatever you're doing, that had to make him feel a little more calm. But in your opinion, Anthony, he had to know what was going on at some point. And, he didn't give any type of, inclination that, he knew he was in some kind of trouble for what he did?
Well, I don't think what happened was my mother never told my father. My mother was scared of him. This is what happened. So there was more to the story than him just beating up my mother. Prior to him actually laying hands on my mother, he was shaking her down for money. He was taking her to the bank. There was other incidents that happened. And she was in fear of him. And she was in fear of him hurting us, me or my brother. So like after the incident happened and I found out, my mother, I could see she was a nervous wreck. And at one point I told my mother, Ma, what's wrong with this Frankie? And she went, stay away from him. He's crazy. He'll hurt you. Just forget it. So she was in fear. So she never told my father. I think he just felt that we didn't say anything to anybody. I think he thought we were scared of him. He knew he didn't think my father knew, because when he first started dating my sister, his partner, Peter Sakara, told him, listen, this is Fat Andy's daughter. You better think about twice dating this girl. But that's what he did. He also dated before my sister, Sonny Francise's daughter. He dated Michael's sister before this incident. And he dated Danny Marino's niece before this incident. So his pattern was to date wise guys' daughters or relatives, because I guess he felt that was a shield for him. So I think he underestimated me. I think he never realized my father knew because of the fear my mother lived in. Because I'm telling you, he showed no inkling of where I was taking him. He was laughing. The way he was dressed, he had no weapons on him, and he walked in there with a smile on his face. So I think he just underestimated the whole situation and really believed that he had my mother wrapped up. And he knew Alice told me, but I don't think he thought I would take it any further.
So Anthony, the more I hear the story, the more I'm convinced it's that classic scene out the Godfather, the abusive brother-in-law. What makes these people think they could get away with beating up women and being abusive to the mom of someone who was so prestigious in the mafia as your father? What is going through these guys' minds to think they can get away with that disrespect?
He had a drug issue. I think alcohol played a part in that evening. You know what I mean? I think he had a few drinks in him that night, but he just thought he was invincible. Listen, he knew the deal. So, the reason why he died was he knew the deal. He knew that he was married to Fat Andy's daughter. He knew she was my sister, and he knew what my father was capable of doing, even though, but maybe he felt my father was in jail and he couldn't put it together. I don't know what he thought, but he just thought he was invincible. And, you know, to move, just not to change the subject, but so he knew the deal. Like a couple of years later, my sister started dating another kid named Chris from the neighborhood. He was just a regular kid. He wasn't mobbed up. He didn't know nothing about the mob. He was just a kid. He liked to use drugs. He was hooked up with my sister, and they got arrested with a stolen car and some credit cards. They had gotten arrested. So I got my sister out on bail and everything, and I went to see my father. And I told my father what happened. You know, he knew my sister got arrested and everything. And he told me, he got your sister arrested. Does he know that she's my daughter? I said, Dad, this guy don't know nothing about wise guys. He's a kid from the neighborhood. He goes, yeah. He goes, well, you know what you got to do here, right? So I looked at him, I go, you know what I got to do? I said, you want me to clip this kid? He goes, yeah, you know what you got to do here? I said, I'm not going to do that. I said, I said, what do you, I told my father, yeah, you know what we'll do, Dad? This is when he really got mad. I said, you know what we'll do, Dad? We'll kill everybody she goes out with till she meets a brain surgeon. And then, you know, and then we'll have a big wedding. I told him. So now he gets mad. Now he got, you know, he got mad. He goes, I'll take care of it myself. Forget it. Don't forget it. I'll take care of it on my own. Don't do nothing for me. I'll take care of it. I said, all right, then you take care of it. So I got back to the neighborhood and I sent for this kid. I said, listen, you better run away or do something because you're going to go. I said, you know, and he just, like, you could see the panic in the kid's face. And I never saw the kid again after that. A couple of years later, I got a letter from a guy that was in prison in upstate New York. And he said, listen, there's a kid here named Chris that said he used to date your sister. Do you know him? So then I knew the kid was still alive. I said, yeah, he's a kid. And the reason why I gave that kid a pass and the reason why I helped save that kid was because he didn't know the deal. Frankie knew the deal. This kid didn't know. This kid was just a neighbor. If this kid would have knew the deal, then he would have got killed. So because my belief system is, listen, if you want to be in the mob or you want to be associated with the mob, you know, if you do X, Y, and Z, A, B, C might happen to you. You know what I mean? So, you know, you gotta, you know, you have to follow the rules. And the rules are, you know, you don't beat up wise guys' wives or mothers. But he just thought he was invincible, and he underestimated me, and he walked in there like he walked right in without any kind of issue.
Wow. Over to you, Bruno.
Okay, you know, growing up in Brooklyn and, you know, growing up around everybody, you know, there's a couple of rules you don't break, Anthony. You know, you try to avoid dating any wise guy's daughter. You know what I mean? Or anybody, even talking to somebody's wife is, you know, it's frowned upon.
I know, yeah.
So, you know, how, you know, it's almost like the girls, they go after these guys knowing that the fathers are going to be mad. You know what I mean? And that's how everybody, so explain to us how everybody gets, you know, everything's connected. I'm not talking about, you know, just in the mob. I'm talking about, like, you know, you're hanging out with 5 different dudes and your sister or your buddy's sister, you know, you want to go out with her, this and that. Tell everybody about the unwritten rules about going out with somebody's ex-girlfriend. Is that how the dynamic works? Listen,
like, all right, so in the 70s, I used to run around with Neil's son, Buddy, Croach. Neil was the underboss of the Gambino family. I was very, very tight with his brother. Now, Neil had a daughter named Tony, very attractive girl, was crazy about me, used to want to be, you know, and I, you know, like we would be out in a club, right? We would be out in a club and we would be all out partying, and then it'd be the end of the night, and she would ask me, would you drive me home? Now, I never drove her home without another person with me. So I would say, all right, Louie, take a ride. She goes, no, you just drive me home. And I, what are you, fucking crazy? I'm not driving you home alone. Your father, you know, because now Tony, 2 people got killed over her.
I remember that.
Yeah. One guy, they rolled him up in a rug and burnt him in a lot. Another guy, Louis Baja, we had the contract to kill him. He was a coke dealer that hung out with us. He was going out with her. Neil gave my father, we set him up to get killed over her. So, you know, so what the protocol is, you don't do that. But you know what? I mean, it happens. Like if someone comes to you and says, listen, I really like your daughter, your sister, you know, as if I take her out on a date, you know, if you're okay with it, you're okay with it. But if you're not, you know, and you tell them no, it's no. The thing is, but a lot of guys in the mob think even though the girlfriend's the ex-girlfriend, they're still the girlfriend. You know, like I know guys that wanted to kill people. Like I know there was a couple of guys in the Casey family that were going out with one of my friend's ex-girlfriends. They wanted to kill each other because they didn't think they should go out with them. Ronnie One Arm, I'm sure they hear that name, Ronnie One Arm. He was a captain in the Gambino family. He went out with this girl, Donna, and when he broke up with her, another guy, Robert, started dating her, and he wanted to kill the guy because he was going out with his ex-girlfriend. It's like they mark their territory. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, it's not, you know, it's something you don't want to do, but it does happen. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not. I mean, my sister, a friend of mine dated my sister, Frankie. He was my partner, but you know, I knew him, we all grew up together and I knew it was a respectful thing. And I was glad she was with him instead of the other bums that she used to date, you know, so I guess it's an individual preference. You said that you were commissioned to set up the guy to be killed, the boyfriend. Did that happen? And if so, how did it happen? This is what happened. So we were hanging out with this guy named Louis Baja. He was a Puerto Rican kid. He was a big coke dealer, and he was a friend of ours, and he was hanging out with us. And like I said, Tony, Neil's daughter, and her brother Buddy were very close with me. And we used to all go out together. All of us, you know, we used to go to discos together. And he started dating Tony. And Neil found out. But he was doing it on the sneak because I told him to stay away from her. He was told to stay away from Tony, basically. We all told him to stay the fuck away from her. It's Neil's daughter, you know, stay away from her. And he didn't listen, you know, so he did it on the down low. So Neil sent for my father, and he knew that we were friends with Baja, that we could do it. And he told my father what was going on, and my father goes, okay, we'll take care, you know, we'll take care of it. So we were setting up Louis Baja to be murdered. And what happened was we owned a bar. My brother and I owned a bar in Ozone Park called Mar Benny's. And one night he was in there, Louis, about 2 weeks before we were actually going to do it. And he was in there, and two of my friends that knew what we were going to do to Louis Baja were in there with Louis, and they thought they could like impress my father. So it was raining out. So they took Louis Baja out of the bar and they shot him in the head, but he didn't die. He was crippled, like he became an invalid, and he went back to Puerto Rico and he passed away a couple of years later. And my father wasn't happy with them, don't get me wrong, because the way they did it and the fact that he didn't even die. So, you know, they thought they were going to impress my father by doing it because they knew what the situation was. And so Louis Baja got shot, but he didn't die. He was maimed, and unfortunately he passed away a couple of years later in Puerto Rico. But we were gonna do that. Her other boyfriend, her other coke dealing boyfriend, her brother killed him. Buddy killed him. They threw his body in a lot. So, you know, you don't really want to go out with these guys' daughters. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's not. There's other women around that you could go with. But like I said, in my brother-in-law's case, he thought it was like a shield because that was his thing. You know, he went out with wise guys' daughters or nieces. I mean, he thought like that was a good thing or a shield for him, that it was going to save him. But in the end, it got him killed. Over to you, Bruno.
Okay. So, Anthony, I want to ask you, you know, switching gears a little bit, you mentioned that you were away for a little bit of a coke problem or you had a drug problem. Yeah. You know, back in the 70s and 80s, I think everybody was doing coke. You know, I was one of them as well. How did your crew perceive you after you went away to get a little help? Was that considered you being a little, you know, tainted, or, you know, I don't know if I'm wording it correctly, but did anybody frown upon that? Can you give us a little insight on that about what you're going through? No. I mean, my crew, everybody was happy for me. Listen,
when I got out of treatment, I got out of treatment on I spoke about this numerous times. When I got out of treatment, on a Wednesday night. I flew back home on a Wednesday night. Saturday, I knew John Gotti, who was the boss now, ate lunch every Saturday afternoon at the Bergen Fish Club. He held court there every Saturday afternoon. So I got out of treatment. I wanted to go say hello to him, of course. You know, he knew I was in treatment. I went there with Tony Lee, my father's partner. We went to the Bergen Fish Club. We went in, he sees me, he hugs me, kisses me, right? We have lunch. After lunch, he says, come outside, I want to talk to you. Now this is John Gotti, he's the boss. We go outside and he looks at me, he goes, how do you feel? I said, I feel good. He goes, do you think you got it beat? Right, just like that. So I look at him, you know, so I go, well, I'm not going to do any of it today. I told him, you know, just for today, right? I said, well, I'm not going to do any of it today. He goes, okay. He says to me, what can I do for you? I don't want, you know, what do you need? You need anything? I don't want you stressed out. Now, this is the boss of the most powerful crime family in the country at the time. He's asking me what he could do for me because he doesn't want me stressed out, right? So I says, well, I don't have a car. I didn't have a car at the time because I don't know, my car got wrecked. And, you know, I said, I don't have a car. He goes, you don't have a car? I said, no, not yet. I got to go get one. He goes, all right. He goes, we go back in, he goes in. So next to the Bergen Fish Club, he had an office. And he goes in his office and he makes a phone call. He comes out and he goes, okay, listen, go to 84th Street and Atlantic Avenue and there's a car lot. He goes, go in there and ask for a guy named Anthony. Which he says, and he'll know, he's waiting for you. I said, all right. So Tony Lee takes me to this car lot on Atlantic Avenue. I walk in and I go to the guy, you Anthony? He goes, yeah. I said, John sent me. He goes, John sent me. He goes, look around, let me know which car you want, take whatever car you want. He told me, right? So now I'm in this car lot. Of course, I'm looking for a Cadillac now, right? I'm looking around, right? And I'm looking around and I see this beautiful, back in the day, you know, this is 1988, right? I see this beautiful white four-door Pontiac Bonneville, beautiful car, white saddle leather interior, right? So I tell the guy, how about that car? He goes, you like it? I go, yeah. Boom, puts the plates on it, you know, whatever. I drive off the lot. I go back to the Bergen Fish Club. I show John the Bonneville, right? He says, all right. He goes in his pocket and he takes out $2,000 and he says to me, here's $2,000. He says, I want you to come here every Saturday with $100. And he went, and don't fucking disappoint me, with his finger. Because if you ever see his films, he's always pointing with his finger. You ever see the films of him, like, you know, the surveillance pictures? He used to talk like this and he used to point with his finger. And he says, and don't disappoint me. I said, no, I'll be here every Saturday. So I went back the next Saturday. I gave him 100. I went back the second Saturday. I gave him 100. The third Saturday, I go back. And we go for a walk and he tells me, how you doing? I go, I'm doing good. I go, I'm doing good. You know, I'm back to work. I feel great. I was looking better. I put on weight. I was dressed nice. You know, I was starting to feel like my old self again. You know what I mean? And you could see it. He says, well, you look good. I go, thanks. He says, how much more you owe me? I said, well, would this make $1,700? He goes, okay, keep it, the rest for a gift. Nice. So, like, I mean, here's the boss of a family, you know, and treating me like I'm his son, you know, like, so what it was I think a lot of people were happy because, you know, before that, I knew that life. I was good at it, you know, and I was good at it and and I was good at it and everybody knew I was good at it and I was Fat Andy's son. So I think a lot of people were glad because it benefited them too. Not only me, it benefited them too. Like it benefited Nicky Carrazzo, who was a captain, you know, who I got later on got indicted with a few years down the line. We got indicted on a big case in Miami. So a lot of people were rooting for me because they knew that I was capable of certain things that would benefit everybody at large. So yeah, you know, don't get me wrong. Some people, you know, bad rapped me and all that shit, you know, junkie and this and that. But overall, I think the people that really cared about me were happy for me and were rooting for me.
All right, we're going to go back to the beginning now, Anthony, and just take your story through the order of things happening. And let's start with your family history, you know, Murder Inc., your dad, how he started out, you know, doing his scams and then he got incorporated and all that stuff. Yeah.
So my father was born in 1926. In 1932, his father passed away. My grandfather, he got hit by a trolley car in Brooklyn, and he died in the street. He bled out in the street. So now my father was 8 years old when his father died. At that point in time, my father's friends, my father lived in East New York, which was a very mobbed up neighborhood. At that point in time, my father's two best friends were this guy, Larry Abendando and Lenny Dodona. Larry Abendando's father was the Dasher. He was a member of Murders Incorporated. He got, if you Google his name, the Dasher, it all comes up. He got the chair with Lepke and all them guys. He was one of the main killers. And Lenny Dodone's uncle was Happy Mayoni. He was another member of Murders Incorporated who Abe Rellis gave up for the murders, and they all got the electric chair with Lepke. So his two best friends had relatives in Murders Incorporated. So my father was raised by these people. So he was in and out of their houses. Later on, he hooked up with Tony Lee, who later became his lifelong partner. So he was always around mob guys, and he had no father. So they were the sort of the people that he looked up to. And he was a tough kid, you know, from what he tells me, he was a tough kid. He said he learned how to fight because in Brooklyn, everybody were Brooklyn Dodger fans. I know you like soccer over there, but you know, we like baseball over here. So my father was a Yankee fan. My father loved Joe DiMaggio. So he told me he learned how to fight really good because he used to have to knock out all the Brooklyn Dodger fans because he was the only Yankee fan in the neighborhood. He said so. That's how he learned how to fight good. So anyway, he was a tough kid. He got drafted during the war when he was 18. And, you know, he had no father. He had, you know, his mother owned a candy store, my grandmother. And he went into the service at 18. He got drafted, and he was in basic training down south. And he had a very abusive sergeant, a Southern guy who kept calling him racial names, Guinea, Wop, and, you know, abusing him and everything. So my father stabbed him. He waited for him one night to go into the latrine, and he followed him in the latrine, and he stabbed him up, and he hitchhiked back to Brooklyn. And he came back to Brooklyn, and my grandmother made him surrender, and he surrendered to the MPs, and he went to prison. He went to Leavenworth for a couple of years. The war ended. He got out of Leavenworth, and he was only home 6 months. He went back to prison. He got arrested in Brooklyn. He went back to prison, and in prison in Sing Sing, he hung out with a lot of wise guys in there. This guy, Chrissy Ticker, took him under his wing, who later became the underboss of the Lucchese family, took him under his wing and, you know, started schooling him. But when he got out of Sing Sing, he hooked it back up with Tony Lee, and they had no money. And they started robbing poker games in Brooklyn, poker games, small dice games. And they robbed 2 poker games. They robbed this guy, Tony the Sheik's poker game. He was, at the time, a soldier in the Genovese family. He later became a captain. And they robbed this guy, Charlie Wagon's poker game, who was a wise guy with Albert Anastasia, with the Mangano family at the time. So what happened was, after they robbed Charlie's poker game, he sent for Albert Mayoni, who was Happy Mayoni's brother, the member of Murders Incorporated that I told you about earlier. And he asked Albert, who is this kid Andy that's robbing these poker games and everything? Who is this kid? He says, he's from the neighborhood. So Albert said, yeah. He said, he's Liberty's kid brother. Now, Liberty was my older uncle, Frank, who was my father's oldest brother, who everybody in the neighborhood knew. So he said, that's Liberty's kid brother. He goes, that's Liberty's kid brother. He says, you think you could get the money back from him? So Albert told him, listen, there's only 2 things you could do with this kid. Either you could kill him or give him a job. He's not giving you back the money. It's out of there's no way he's going to give you back the money. So Charlie says, could you bring him here to meet me? So Albert said, I'll try. So Albert told my father that Charlie wanted to see him. So my father went there with Tony Lee. Tony Lee stood outside with guns. He said Tony was in a car outside with 2 pistols. And my father went in by himself and had a conversation with Charlie. And Charlie took a liking to him and made my father instantly became Charlie's driver. So my father started driving Charlie around. Now, my father at the time was a kid. He was only 23 or 24 years old. He was a baby. And He said one day he was in the bar with Charlie, and Charlie took him outside to come outside. I want to talk to you. And he took my father outside, and Charlie asked my father, he said, listen, if I ask you to kill somebody, would you do it without asking any questions? So I told my father, yeah. He goes, so I said, what did you do? He goes, well, I looked at him. He goes, and I said, yeah. I said, yeah, if it's, I definitely, I said, yeah, I wanted to get straightened out. He goes, I knew the deal by then. And I told him, yeah. I said, and then he said about a couple of weeks later, they picked him up at his mother, because he still lived home with his mother. He wasn't even married yet. He still lived home with his mother. So they picked him up at my grandmother's house with Charlie and another guy in the front seat. And there was another car following them with Charlie's brother, Danny, was driving it. And my father got in the back seat and they pulled out. And my father told me when we pulled out and got away from grandma's house, he goes, I whispered in the guy's ear. I said, you whispered in the guy. I didn't know what he was talking about. I said, you whispered in the guy's ear. What do you mean you whispered in the guy's ear? And he went like this with his hand. He goes, I whispered in his ear. And I said, oh. And that was the first hit he did for that family. And then after that, Charlie introduced him to Albert Anastasia. And then he did a couple of more murders for Albert. And then the books were closed at the time, but he was a special case. This is a picture. You can see this. This is a picture when he was 26 years old. My mother's pregnant in this picture with me. This is when he just first got straightened out. This is a portrait that John Gotti had made for me of my parents. John had that made for me about 40 years ago. Yeah. So anyway, they took him to see Albert Anastasia, and Albert used to call him the kid. He said Albert used to call me the kid. I used to go meet him. He used to give me a pair of gloves and a gun and say, go down there and kill that guy. And that was it. Albert was the high executioner. So because he did so much work for them, he got straightened out when the books were closed. And when his name went around, so now when you get proposed, they put your name on a piece of paper and they pass it around to all the families, the 5 families, and everybody has to approve it to see if anybody wants to put in any beefs or claims that you shouldn't, you don't deserve to get straightened out. And what happened was this guy, Tony the Sheik, actually put in a beef that he didn't want my father straightened out. So they had to sit down in Manhattan with Tony the Sheik, a captain from the Genovese family, and Albert Anastasia, and Charlie, and this guy, Tommy Raven, who was the captain. And my father had to sit at another table because he wasn't straightened out yet. So he sat, but he could hear everything. And Tony the Sheik told Albert Anastasia that my father was an animal. He said, this kid's an animal. He shouldn't get straightened out. He's an animal. He has no respect, and on and on and on and on. And my father said Albert Anastasia was just like staring at him. And then Albert Anastasia told Tony the Sheik he's an animal. So Tony the Sheik goes, yeah. He spoke broken English, Tony the Sheik, because he was from Italy. He goes, yeah, he's an animal. So Albert Anastasia said he's an animal. He goes, well, who the fuck you want me to straighten out? Priests? So like that was the end of the conversation. You know what I mean? Like, and that was it. So and of course my father got straightened out in 1953, the same year I was born. The books were closed. Him and another guy, Frankie Martin, got straightened out. There were special cases, and that was the beginning of my father's induction, into the mob, as a main member.
Bruno, you got any questions about his dad?
Yeah. So as far as your dad went, he sounded like just one of the normal guys you grow up around.
Yeah.
How did you feel, when you were younger, 8, 9, 10 years old, you see your dad, he's got the nice clothes on, and, did you know right away, Anthony, that this is what you wanted to do with your life? I mean, did you see all this and be like, this is it for me. This is what I want to do, Dad, period. How did that play out?
So when I was a kid, like 7, 8, 9 years old, I didn't know what he did. I knew something was different, but I didn't know what. I knew something wasn't right. Not in a bad way. I just knew something was different. Like he was not home the same hours as my friends' fathers, and he would take me with him on the weekends to bars he owned, and how he got treated. When he walked in, he was like a celebrity, and people would stick money in my pocket, and I had the run of the bar. Like nobody told me nothing. So I always knew there was something different. Even when I went to school, like, you know, you go to school and the teacher, you know, you have that one day, like, what does your dad do for a living? And you got to get up in front of the class and say, my dad is a fireman, you know, like, you know what I mean?
Hope you're enjoying this podcast. There's a word from our sponsor, Rocket Money. The other day, I had to cancel 3 Amazon Prime memberships. I had a personal on the UK Amazon, US Amazon, company account, US Amazon, UK Amazon. Do you understand how hard it is to cancel these bloody things? That's why Rocket Money makes these things so much easier, formerly known as Truebill. The app shows all your subscriptions in one place and cancels what you don't want for you. Rocket Money can even find subscriptions you didn't know you were paying for. Just like with me, with my 4 Amazon Prime memberships, you may find out you've been at least double charged for a subscription. To cancel a subscription, all you've got to do is press cancel and Rocket Money takes care of the rest. Get rid of useless subscriptions with Rocket Money now. Go to rocketmoney.com/Sean, SHAUN. Seriously, it could save you hundreds per year. That's rocketmoney.com/Sean, SHAUN. Thank you for supporting our sponsor, Rocket Money. Links in the description box. Cheers.
So like I had those days. So I would ask my father, Dad, tomorrow I got to tell the class what you do for a living. You know, what do you do for a living? And he would look at me and say, tell them I work in the dry cleaners. I press clothes. Now I knew that wasn't true, even though I was 8, 9 years old, but I said it anyway, but I didn't know what was true, but I knew that wasn't, but I didn't go any further. Like, well, that's not what you do, Dad. I just didn't say anything. And that's what I would say. And because he would say that, because he was partners in a couple of dry cleaning places with this Jewish fella that was around him. So he did own a couple of them, and he was on the books there as, you know, no-show jobs. But I knew that was bullshit, but I would run with it anyway. When I was about 13, I left the block, you know, because back then in New York, you know, we all hung out on our block. You know, I mean, to a certain age, you know, everything was done. You know, we played all the games, stickball in the street, Ringalivio, everything was stoop ball, everything was on the block. There was no internet, you know, it wasn't like today. Everybody sits in front of a fucking TV or looks at a phone. We were in the street all day. You know what I mean? Running around until your mother, hey, get in the house, I'll kill you. Get in here, you son of a bitch. Starts yelling out of the window, you know? So you know, I used to tell my mother, make sure, I said, if I was a kid today, you'd be in jail. I used to tell her the beating that she used to give me. So anyway, now at 13, I ventured off my block. And I started hanging out by this pizzeria on 101st Avenue. And when I got there, the older guys used to whisper, that's Fat Andy's son. That's Fat Andy's son. And that's when I started finding out who he really was. So I learned who he was through the older guys in the neighborhood when I branched off my block. And then you know, him and I started having conversations. And then a couple of newspaper articles. He had gotten indicted on a case in Brooklyn, and he was in the newspaper. So that's how I learned about who he was, and that he was. I still didn't know a lot about the mob and the protocols, and I just knew he was he was a gangster. You know, I knew people feared him, and I knew how he got treated with a lot of respect. But you know, I was a kid. I was 13. I was smoking weed. You know, it was the 60s. You know, I was listening to rock and roll. I didn't know. You know, I thought I wanted to be a Beatle. Then I wanted to be, then I wanted to be Sonny Corleone. You know, I was very confused when I was a kid. So anyway, when I was 16, I got suspended from school. Now at this point, I knew he was a wise guy from, you know, being in the neighborhood. And now here had already introduced me now to John Gotti and a lot of wise guys, because when I started hanging out off the block, he took me to all these social clubs to tell them, hey, this is my son. If you see him, you know, look out for him. If anything happens, don't hurt him, or, you know. So he took me to Charlie Wagon's club. He introduced me to John Gotti. He took me to all the clubs in the neighborhood, because a lot of wise guys had clubs in my neighborhood. And he took me to all these clubs and introduced me to everybody. That was my first meeting. That's the first time I met John Gotti, was when I was around 13 years old. I already knew Charlie Wagons because he strained out my father, so I knew him my whole life. But I met John later on. So when I was 16, I got suspended from school, and he wouldn't talk to me. He didn't want me in the street. I was his oldest son. He didn't want me in the street. But he wouldn't talk to me. So I called up my Uncle Frank, who was Liberty, who years ago got Charlie. So I called up my Uncle Frank. I said, listen, he don't want to talk to me. I got suspended from school. You got to come here. I want to go to work. So my Uncle Frank came to the house and we had to sit down in my kitchen. And I told my father said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to go to work. He goes, you want to go to work? He goes, okay, I'll get you in the bricklayers union. Back then, that was a big union, the bricklayers union. I said, bricklayers union. I said, I don't want to be no bricklayer. He goes, you don't want to be a bricklayer. Well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to work for you. And he looked at me and I'll never forget, like it was yesterday. This was 1969. He sits back in the chair and he looks at me and then he leaned forward and with his finger, he went like this. He went, you want to work for me? He says, well, remember one thing, going to jail is all part of the job. And, here I am, now I'm 16, I'm already fucked up in the head. You know what I mean? Like I want, and I sat back and I go, hey, that was fine. I said, all right, well, whatever. He goes, all right. The next day, he took me to this guy's club on Merrick Road. His name was Philly the Pimp. I don't know. I don't think he was a pimp, but that was his nickname, Philly the Pimp. He had a blackjack game, and that was my first illegal job. Put me in the blackjack game to work. And I loved it, And then what happened was he still tried to discourage me because a couple of months later, he took me with him to this bar in Brooklyn called the 5 O'Clock Lounge. It was on Church Avenue in Brooklyn. I'll never forget this. And we walked in, it was a Friday night, and the bar was packed Friday night, packed. Music's playing, the jukebox going, packed. And we walk in, and everybody, hey, Andy. And we're, now I'm only 17, but I could drink now because I'm Fat Andy's son. I order a drink, he orders a drink. I'm sitting at the bar, and we're drinking, and about an hour or so goes by, I don't know, and all of a sudden he says to me, look around. So I look around, he goes, you notice anything? I go, yeah, the bar got kind of empty. He goes, yeah, didn't it? He goes, you know why? I go, no, why? He goes, because I'm here. I said, because you're here. He goes, yeah, because they don't know if I'm here to kill somebody, smack somebody, shake somebody down. He goes, this is how you want to live? That people don't even want to be in your company? So he actually thought that was going to deter me. I fucking loved it. I was like, whoa, this is the greatest thing since ice cream. I want that too. I was like, whoa, like it blew me away. To this day, I got goosebumps right now. This is a lot of years ago. This is 1970, you know what I mean? The bar emptied out, like just a couple of people stood in, but he actually thought, he was hoping that would like discourage me, that I don't want people to feel like that about me, but it was the complete opposite. Like I was blown away by it. And then, and then he just kept on putting me work. Then I went to work in dice games, crap games. Then he started schooling me about the mob. He started taking me, then he took me to Mulberry Street. I met Neil. I started meeting all the captains, and I met Neil, the underboss, and I started going to the Ravenite. I started hanging out with Neil's son, Buddy. Then I started getting arrested. And then I went to prison in 78. When I went to prison in 78, a couple of days before I turned myself in, they had a big party for me at the Ravenite, a going away party at the Ravenite. It was like in the movies, like in Goodfellas. So I get dressed up, a suit and tie, me and my father, we got all dressed up, suit and ties. We get in the car, we pick up Tony Lee, we meet my father's crew, Nicky Carrazzo and all these guys who later on became big names now. They're bosses, consiglieres, my father straightened all of them out. They were all in his crew at that time. They were kids. And we go to the Manhattan, to the Ravenite. We walk in, Neil had a big spread for me. And it was like I was going away to Harvard. That's what it was like. Hey, hugging me, kissing me, telling me when you go to jail, don't talk to nobody. If anybody says they know me, you make sure they know me, and all that bullshit. And it was like when we had a party for me, celebrating that I'm going to prison. So here I am, 23, I just got married, and I'm off to prison. You know what I mean? For the first time. And that was the beginning for me.
So earlier on, Anthony, you mentioned that the question was put to your father, if you were asked to kill someone, would you do it? You've been described as a Gambino hitman. You've already talked about some murder conspiracies, but going back to when the crimes escalated to the level of homicide, did that question, was it presented to you? And how did you mentally adjust to be engaged in a murder conspiracy for the first time?
It wasn't presented to me that way. The first time I was involved was, like I said, with Louis Baja. So my father came to me and said, listen, we're gonna Louis Baja's got to go. He's something to that effect. He goes, Louis Baja. And like I said, why? And he said, because, you know, Neil with Tony. And I said, okay. You know, it wasn't presented to me like, do you want to do this? You know what I mean? Or could you do this? Or are you okay with it? So I guess he just knew I would be okay with it. I don't know. It wasn't presented to the same way Charlie presented it to him. It was presented it to me like, listen, Louis Baja did what we told him not to do, and now he's got to pay the price. So we're going to set him up, and that was it. The next time it happened, before my brother-in-law was with this guy Bobby Glasses and this guy Frankie Geesh. They killed two guys in a bar on Jamaica Avenue. Pete Gotti's daughter was in there, and they had a meeting in the bar. I was sitting there, and John Gotti, my father, Pete Gotti, Angelo Quack, and Johnny Caniglia had a meeting in this bar, and they were talking at a table, and then my father called me over and he said, sit down. And I sat down, and he looked at me and he goes, listen, because Frankie Geesh, I was in business with him. He said, Frankie Geesh got to go. I said, all right. And then they told me the plan that he was going to meet me, and Johnny Caniglia was going to shoot him. So I just got thrown into these conspiracies nobody really asked me if it was okay. Basically, my father just assumed that I was his son and I was going to go, you know, I wasn't going to not go along with it. So I just got thrown into him, and it was, you know, and it was okay back then. You know, listen, them things didn't faze me back. You know, I talk, you know, I went out for dinner with guys knowing like they were going to die that week, you know, and they were sitting at the table with us, you know, like, and I knew that, you know, they were going to die that weekend. They were only out to dinner with us because, you know, we wanted them to, you know, not see it coming, you know, and they, you know, were sitting there. Here I am sitting at a table with guys eating dinner, and I knew like Thursday, this guy was going to get killed. But that's the life, you know, that's the life. You know, Sammy the Bull talks about, you know, as he talks about it a lot, like, you know, like about the murders he committed, you know, like, and I feel the same way he feels. He goes, listen, these people knew the deal. You know, they knew the deal. They knew that, you know, this is the mob and this is what happens if you do the wrong thing. So, you know, they steal from you, they do whatever they do with it. So, you know, my father used to tell me, anybody, whoever he killed deserved to get killed. But I mean, that's just maybe how we justify living that way in our own head. You know what I mean? Like my father used to tell me, murder only counts when you get out of bed in the morning and go kill somebody and then come home and have dinner with your family. He goes, that's work. He goes, well, if you're drunk and you do it, or you do it out of anger, he goes, that's murder. Yeah. You know, like, you know, so it's just, that's the way it is. I don't know. I don't even have a word to, what is it? It is what it is.
Part of the job description.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to ask you, said you went to the joint in 78. Is that correct?
Yeah.
First time. So walk us through when you got in there. Where did they bring you? Did they bring you downtown Brooklyn? Did you go straight to the joint? Could you walk me through your first, you know, your first couple?
The first time I went to prison was March of 78. I had a case out in Nassau County. I got convicted and I got sentenced. I had to go upstate. So I turned myself into to the Nassau County jail, to the courthouse. And then they put me in the Nassau County jail. I stood there a couple of days. They sent me to Sing Sing. There was a Sing Sing back then. There was a transit block. I was in transit there. And then I got a state number from Sing Sing. They sent me to Dannemora, to reception in Dannemora. I was in Dannemora for a while. I was up there with a couple of guys. I was on the court with a few guys. I was in Dannemora for a few months. Then from Dannemora, I went to Comstock, which was Gladiator School. It was a fun place. I went to Comstock. And I was there for a couple of months. Then from Comstock, I went to Elmira. And then from Elmira, I winded up going down to Staten Island to Arthur King. But, you know, I did a good bit back then. You know, back then it was different than it is today. All the cops, the COs were on the take. You know, like we had plenty of food. You know, anywhere I went, wherever I went, there was someone waiting for me with a package, with, you know, whatever shower slippers. And, you know, I was very comfortable in there. You know, you know, people looked out for me. I knew people every jail I was in. I knew somebody. My father always came to visit me. That was always an event when he came to visit me because the COs and everybody knew who he was. And it's funny because I was in Elmira and the inmates jumped the CO and they broke his arm. So they locked us down. They locked down the whole prison. And beknownst to my father, he came to visit me that day. So I'm in my cell. I'm in my cell, right? And two COs come, because now the whole prison is locked. Two COs come to my cell and go, listen, your father is in the visitor room and he don't want to leave until we bring you down here. Now they're scared. They go, oh, yeah, what do you want from me? They go, listen, we're going to bring you down there for 5 fucking minutes and then you're coming back. I said, all right. So they cuff me up. They cuff me up, right? They bring me out of my cell, boom, boom. And I go in the visiting room, and there's my father in the visit. I said, what are you doing? He goes, what am I doing? So he just sees me for a couple of minutes and then he leaves. He wouldn't leave. That's how they were like, oh shit, what are we gonna do? They figured he'd wait for them by the house or something. So they brought me down. So anywhere I went back then, it was very, the COs had one. I'll tell you, it was so good for jail. When I was in Art to Kill, Tommy Bellotti, who got murdered with Paul Castellano, he was good friends with my father. So he comes from Staten Island. So where Art to Kill was, he had a bar and grill up the road from Art to Kill where all the COs used to go there. He used to send me buckets of tomato sauce with steaks in them and the CO used to bring me them and he used to send me them from his restaurant, Tommy Bellotti, that got killed with Paul Castellano. So I was very comfortable then. It didn't really faze me. Then I got out in 80. I was going back and forth to Florida with my father and he got arrested in 84. He went to prison. And then I went away, I got clean in 88. I committed the murder. And then in 89, I got arrested again. I got arrested for a state RICO for numbers to policy business that I ran with my father. I got indicted in 89, and then I got re-indicted again in March of 90. I got re-indicted on another case. So I had 2 state cases. I put them all together and I got a 1 1/3 to 4. I went away in 91 for 16 months. I got out in 92, October of 92, and I started making a lot of money then. A lot of money. I took over a vending company. I had a lot of all illegal activities, nothing legit. I had like chop shops and credit card thing. I was just had my hands in everything, not drugs, pretty much, mostly just everything else. I got remarried, had a daughter. And then in 95, I got indicted for a big bookmaking case out of Brooklyn and Queens. Big bookmaking case, Gambino family, all that bullshit. It's funny because, to backtrack a minute, in 89, when I got arrested with the numbers, it was on the front page of the news, John Gotti crew, 14 million a year. Now, John had nothing to do with it. It was my father's business. John had nothing to do with it. So when I get out on bail, I go to the Bergenot Fish Club. And of course, I walk in, he goes, hey, where's my money? I go, what money? He goes, we made 14 million last year. I didn't get 10 cents. I said, yeah. I said, you think it's funny? I said, I'm going to go back to jail. You want to break my balls? Where's my money? He was breaking my balls. Where's my money? He goes, we made 14 million last year. I didn't get 10 cents. Yeah. So I got indicted again in 89, in 95 for bookmaking. I took a plea. I got a 2 to 4. While I was in prison doing that bid, I got indicted by the feds in Miami with Nicky Carrazza and Lenny DiMaria, all captains on a big RICO case with a murder conspiracy and Shylock and extortion. I got indicted on a big case in Miami. The marshals took me to Florida. I took a plea, I got 10 years. And then I wind up going back to the state. I finished that. I went back to the feds. I did 5 years in the feds. I was cellmates with the Westwood. I don't know if you ever heard of the Westies, that Irish crew from Hell's Kitchen.
Birds guys.
Evan Kelly was my cellmate for 4 years. Yeah. I said, Tom, saw you more in your underwear than I saw my second wife in her panties. I used to tease him all the time. Yeah. So he was my cellmate. He was a good guy, Kevin Kelly. And then I wind up getting 10 years. I wind up doing 8 years and 3 months. I got out in 04. I was supposed to get straightened out again. And then I got indicted for the murder. And then in 05, I got arrested in front of my son's house by the feds for the murder. And then a year later, I decided to cooperate. Like, I was done, and that was it.
Let's go back, Anthony. Could you take us through the day you became a made man?
I never got made. I got proposed.
Oh, so was that frustrating for you then, not to become made?
Well, you know what? This is what happened. So in 89, I got proposed, and I got arrested and went to prison. I got out in 92. I was supposed to get straightened out again, and I got arrested again because my father was still alive. Tony Lee died in 93. Then my father I was waiting to get straightened out, and I got arrested again. When I went to jail again. When I got out in 04, they sent for me. Nicky Carrazza's guy, Lenny DiMaria, sends for me, and he tells me, listen, we passed your name around again. Everything's approved. He says, this is the situation. He goes, you could go on sit downs. Everybody knows you. Everybody's equal. He goes, you don't need anybody representing you. The only thing we didn't have yet is the ceremony, but everybody knows that you could deal with things on your own. And then he started telling me who's who. This guy's a captain, and he started schooling me on what I needed to know. So basically, I had the respect of a wise guy because they sent word out that I could go on sit downs and everything, but they just didn't have the actual ceremony, which is common. The ceremony was supposed to be like they said around Christmas time, and a week and a half later, I got arrested for the murder, and I was under house arrest. So every time I was waiting for the ceremony, I guess it was like divine intervention. Every time I was waiting for the ceremony, I got arrested or I was in prison. It was like 3 different situations. But the last time is when I came the closest, because they actually sent word out that I could go on sit downs and everything. I didn't need anybody representing me. And, so that was it. But I never actually had the ceremony like my friend Michael. Me and Michael have a lot in common. We're tight. Me and Michael have a lot in common. His father, my father could have been straightened out with his father too. His father loved my father when my father was a kid. Sonny and my father were tight, very tight. Yeah.
So in the interim, in the middle of you going away and getting your time going to the joint, could you tell us a little bit about your crew? Did you have your own crew? Were you under a captain? You said you were doing, the credit cards.
Yeah, no, I had my own little crew. I had my own crew, guys I grew up with. My father's godson, little Joe, he was a good guy. I had this other kid, Robert Angle. I had Sal Peck. I had my own little crew. We all went to jail together in the 70s. We were all on the same cases. My father, they were always with my father. My father loved them. Sal, my friend Sal had no father. My father adopted him. No, we had a tight crew. We did everything together. We were good. When I was a kid in the 70s, we were in this place called the Limehouse. And this old time wise guy told me one day, goes, you're so, lucky you are. You got all these kids around you, all these good kids around you. He told me, you're going to go places. That's what he told me. Go, you kids are going to go play. Yeah, we went right to jail. We went. Yeah, we went up the river. No, I had my own crew. But we were always around with my father and Tony Lee, his partner. We didn't, we answered to them. We never really had to kick up much because he was my father. You know what I mean? So a lot of other guys were jealous. You know what I mean? Like his guys, like my father's guys, the older guys were a little jealous because, we didn't really have to kick up anything because he wasn't going to take money off me, my father. And his partner loved me. His partner, was like my second father. So yeah, we had our own crew. We did everything together. We went to jail together. We conspired to hurt. We did a lot of violent things together. I had my own crew.
Were you always with the Gambinos? And when Gotti and the Bull took out Paul, how did that affect your life?
Well, when it happened, so I was always close with John. And when it happened, I was home watching TV, and it came on the TV they interrupted the show to say that Paul Castellano was just murdered in Manhattan. So I jumped up and I ran to the phone and I called up my father's partner, Tony Lee, and I said, Paul just got shot, and And it was funny because the way he said, I know, like I said, like I knew he knew, like knew, you know what I mean? Like the way he answered me, like I went, oh, fuck, like it didn't hit me, like, holy shit. And I hung up the phone. And then the next day I went to the club and he told me the deal. He was in on the whole planning of it, Tony Lee, and they used his mother's house for meetings when John became the official boss. I actually went that Christmas. John had his first big Christmas party, and I actually was invited to the Christmas party because it was all made guys and a couple of other guys that weren't officially made like me, but we were invited to the Christmas party. Matter of fact, the feds had a lot of pictures of that Christmas party, and I went to that Christmas party with John a couple of weeks after that murder. How did it affect me personally? Well, I started making a lot more money. You know, now I'm with John Gotti. He's the boss. Everybody knows my relationship with him. Tony Lee was always with him. They were tight. He loved my family. So it helped me a lot. It gave me some prestige. It helped me and hurt me more because, you know, because he put us all on Front Street. Let's not forget that. I mean, we were exposed and we all knew we were exposed and we all knew that eventually it was going to hurt us in the end. But, it was financially, it helped me. It gave me some more prestige because of my relationship with him. So it opened up some doors for me because everybody knew I was close to him, in a personal way, not in a business way, personally close to him. And it helped Tony Lee. It made him earn more money and he was very tight with John. And, I used to go out with him. So now he's the boss and I'm clean now. I'm not drinking or not, I'm like sober, and he loved it. So he would go out like to Pastels, this disco in Brooklyn or around Derby. You know about Pastels, huh? He's laughing, Bruno. He must have been there a few times. We go to Pastels and he'd sit in the back, and everybody, he's like, and everybody be looking, and I'd come out and I see girls, hey, you want to meet John Gotti? And I would take them up to the table and sit there because I liked women. And then he would lean over to me and he would say to me, you think you got enough girls at the table? Stop bringing them, yeah? Like he was in my ear, and I go, all right, and so it was a party, like I was with him twice. He signed autographs. Like when I told my father went, what is it? Signed autographs? He can't do that. I said, well, he did it. I was having lunch with him one day. I drove Tony Lee to a meeting. Tony Lee had a meeting with him in a restaurant in Brooklyn with him and Joe Watts. Joe Watts was one of his main guys. He's an English guy, Joe Watts. Yeah, the killer. Yeah. So they were having, so it was Tony Lee, myself, John Gotti, and Joe Watts, and we're having lunch. And a young couple walked up to him and said, oh, Mr. Gotti, we read about you. We saw your Time magazine, because Andy Warhol wrote that thing and, the picture of him. We saw, could you give us your autograph? And he went, yeah, sure. And he gave them his autograph, and when I told my father, and then another time we were walking on Mulberry Street and some people walked up to him and he gave them his autograph. So my father says, what do you mean? Hey, he can't do that. Like the old timers didn't like it. Me, it didn't really, I didn't feel any way about it. My father didn't like it. And Tony Lee, oh, he really didn't like it. When we got in the car, is he fucking kidding? How dare him sign an autograph? What is he kidding? Like Tony Lee was like, whoa. I said, all right, calm down. You're going to have a heart attack. Relax. So, it definitely helped me and it hurt me because you know what? I got really hot after that. The FBI, they were honest night and day. The organized crime task force in New York State were honest. We always paid the price for having that relationship with John. When we went to jail, we went to the worst prisons. We got the most time. So, it was good and bad, but listen, it was the choice I made. I don't blame him for anything. People try to entice me into talking bad about the guy. I don't have anything bad to say about the guy. He was always good to me. He always treated my family well. He always looked out for us. Was he a murderer, a drug dealer, a gangster? Yeah, he was definitely all of those things. But personally, he was always good to me.
Bruno?
Sure. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, you were talking about, everything you did that wasn't legitimate, like Sammy had all the construction companies, Prospect Construction, he had the Plaza Suite.
Yeah, I used to go to Plaza Suite. You used to go there?
Dude,
yeah.
Of course.
I used to go with my father.
After we do this little interview, I'll tell you about my old hangouts. But when you said Pastels, they reopened Pastels years later.
Yeah.
But no, I want to ask you, did you have any legitimate business at all where, you know, like you did construction, you know, you were given a no-show job with the bricklayers. I was in the IBEW, I was local 3.
I had a no-show job at the Delmonico Hotel as a maintenance man in the Delmonico Hotel on Park Avenue. I had a no-show job there for years. We always owned bars. My father always owned a bar or a restaurant. So we always had some kind of legitimate business going, but it wasn't our main source of income. Like me and my brother owned a couple of bars. I had a vending company. Was sort of legit, you know, half legit, half gambling machines, you know. I had a vending company. My wife and I had a clothing legitimate. We had a corporation. We sold clothes because she's into retail, my second wife. So I had a legitimate corporation with her. But my main source of income was always from illegal sources. Yeah, that was my main source of income.
What was Sammy the Bull's reputation like back in the day? What was your relationship with him? And what do you think of his YouTube success?
Well, I mean, I met him when I was a kid. I met him the first time when he was just a soldier. He just got straightened out. My father was always good friends with his captain, Tato, the guy that straightened him out. My father and him sort of came up together. They were in the same crew when they were kids. So my father took me to his construction offices years and years ago. Once that's the first time I met him, because my father had a drywall business. My father was in the construction business, but not on a large scale like Sammy, but he had a company. So we went to see him. That's the first time I met him. Then I really didn't cross paths with him. I hung out in his club that Bruno mentioned. I used to go there all the time with my father. Matter of fact, that's the last place I ever saw Ali Boy Persico, the junior, the kid, Ali Boy. He used to go there too. I used to go up there with my father and my sister. So I used to run into him up there. And then I didn't see him for a while. Then when he became the underboy, nobody knew he was a tough guy, but he knew he did work, and everybody respected him. That's why John gave him that position, you know, because everybody respected him. And when he became the underboss, you know, my relationship with him was good. You know, I wasn't that, I mean, I knew him, we used to talk, you know, he used to tease me a lot of times about girls. Once I was walking up over street I had these 2 strippers fly up from Miami for St. Gennaro for the feast, and I brought them to the of course they wanted to see John Gotti, you know, so I took them to the Raven. John wasn't there, but Sammy was there and Junior was there and a couple of guys were there, and these 2 girls were hot. So Sammy was breaking my, you know, teasing me, you know, come on, we'll go to my penthouse. And, she's going to go with my friend Georgie, and, you know, F Georgie, you know, he was teasing me. But so I got along with him. You know, he was very stern. You know, he was a very stern guy. He would, you know, when you would walk into the Ravenite, so in the Ravenite, John would sit at the back table, and you know, a lot of times Sammy would be standing up next to John like this, like with his arms crossed. And like if you walked up to the table and you went to shake Sammy's hand first, he would like go like this to you, like, you know, you shake John's hand first. You know, like Tony used to get really mad when he used to do that. When he used to do that to Tony Lee, like, oh, you don't like it, Tony. That's who he was. And when he cooperated, I was shocked. Because, you know, I was in prison. I was in prison, and this guy Bobby, who was a wise guy with the Gambinos, Bobby, they used to call him Bobby the Jew, but you know, he wasn't Jewish, that was just his nickname. He was so we used to walk the yard, him and I, every night. And I'm waiting for him one night, and he was late to come out, right? So finally he comes out to the yard and he goes, oh my God, you're not going to believe what happened. I said, what? He goes, that guy's co-defendant flipped. That when he said, we used to call John that guy. Whenever you said that guy, we knew it was John. He goes, that guy's co-defendant flipped. I went, who, Frankie? Like I thought it was Frankie Loke. Like Sammy wasn't even a thought in my mind, because I know he was a crazy, you know, killer, hitman, underboss, you know, like I said, Frankie flipped. He goes, no, Sammy. I said, Sammy? I was like in shock. I said, oh my God. And then the next thing I said, I looked at him, I go, Sammy, I said, he's finished. I said, John, he's finished. You know, like that was my next response was, he's finished. And then we just walked down, you know, it was a sad night. I felt bad for John. And we walked around the yard that night, and then, you know, the rest is history. How do I feel about his youth? Yeah, he's good. I listen to his stories. A lot of the stories he tells, I know. A lot of the people he talks about, I know. I know the same stories. some of them. No, God bless him. Listen, the better he does, the better we'll all do. But he's Sammy the Bull. Listen, he's one of the most famous mob names out there. You know what I mean? Like he's, he was the underboss. John had, when I was away in the feds, guys that came down that were with John and MCC when John was fighting that case. That John had made remarks to them that, if Fat Andy was home, I wouldn't be in this position because, John needed to make someone, his underboss, that was close to the crew in Brooklyn, to Paul Castellano's guys, because they had a lot of money, they had a lot of power, and he had to keep the peace within his own family. And that's why he chose Sammy. My father fit that bill too, because my father was an old timer. Everybody loved him. Them guys, he was close to them. So it was told to me, whether it's true or not, this is what was told to me, that he had made remarks to guys in MCC that if Fat Andy was home, he wouldn't be in this mess. So, unfortunately, he was in a mess. But I'm happy for Sammy. As long as he don't talk bad about me, he can do whatever he wants.
Yeah, he's a great storyteller, and I urge people to go and watch his channel. I mean, Francis and Gravano, the two of the main channels I go to watch the old mafia stories.
Michael's great. Michael, he's, I love Michael. He's a good guy. He's got a good heart. You know what I mean? He helped me. I did his show. He texts me all the time. We text back and forth. We may come over to England together. Hopefully that will work out. So yeah. But Sammy. Sammy. Michael's completely different personality than Sammy. Sammy, sometimes he thinks he's still the underboss. I'm sure Michael agrees with that, right? Sammy sometimes forgets that he's not the underboss anymore.
Over to Bruno.
Yeah. So now, we talked a lot about, where you were, what you did. One remark I want to make, I was surprised when you said, your father's from East New York. That's Lucchese down there. I was surprised that he went over to the Gambinos, but you explained that, and that made sense that he got picked up. Yeah. I want to know now, Anthony, what are you doing now? What's going on with your life now? I know you say you're remarried. What do you got going on? How's your life going now that everything is,
So what happened was, after I made the decision to cooperate, which was a very, very tough decision. It took me, it was very hard. But after I made that decision, so I was living in Michigan, and I got a call from a friend of mine that ran a drug treatment center, and he offered me a job as a counselor. And he said, but I would have to go back to school, and they would pay for the school. So he says, why do you, what makes you think I could be a counselor? He says, well, because of your life experience, because you're in recovery, you're clean a lot of years. He goes, you know how to stay clean. You changed your life. You're not a criminal no more. You have a lot to offer. I told the owner of the treatment center your story. I didn't tell him everything, but he thinks he also thinks you'll be a good counselor. So I decided to do it. So I packed up, I got in my car, me and my cat, and I drove to another state, and I went to work in this treatment center. I went back to school, and I became a counselor in a treatment center. So I've been doing that. Well, now I'm not a counselor. Now I'm a behavioral health technician now. I was a counselor for a few years. I went back to school for addiction, to become an addiction specialist. I finished the school, and I was a counselor for a few years. And that place, unfortunately, went out of business. And then I became a lead behavioral health technician. Now I'm a health technician. And now I just got offered another position as a admissions counselor. So I may take it. I'm not sure. I'm on the fence with it. I just got offered another position. So I'm working in treatment centers, and then I have some stuff going with, my podcast. I have a podcast, Reformed Gangsters, because I'm a reformed gangster. I did some shows on Netflix. I got some coming out on Netflix, and I'm trying to, get my story out there. But basically, I'm working in treatment. That's what I do. I try to help people change their lives, stay clean. I'm trying to get some forgiveness, make up for my past sins. I don't know. So it's
there's a few of us that are doing that.
Yeah,
You're still not dabbling, Anthony. You still got the lions in the fire.
Yeah, no, sometimes I miss my old life. I miss the money. I mean, I can't say I don't miss the cash. I mean, but I miss the action, I miss the respect. I miss, like I tease my daughter all the time. I go to concerts, I used to sit in the front row. Now, like I got to sit in the back, I used to tell her, so it's funny, my daughter, so I was out in LA. This is how my life changed, so I was out in LA. I went to do the Larry Mezzer show out in LA, right? So I'm out in LA. So Michael Francis, so Dua Lipa, my daughter loves her, and I like her too. She's in, I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's a big singer now, Dua Lipa. She was doing a show at the Forum. So I asked Michael, like the mob, Michael, you know anybody that could hook me up for this concert? He goes, I don't know, let me look into it, right? So I go, all right. So a couple of weeks go by, so Michael gets back to me, he goes, tell your daughter, Uncle Michael hooked everything up. Like I said, all right, no problem. So I go to the Forum. So now I go to the VIP booth. I get the tickets, right? And I get the wristbands for the VIP lounge, right? So now I go into my daughter in the VIP lounge and all the celebrities are there and I'm sitting there. And my daughter, she looks, she goes, you used to live like this all the time? I said, yeah, I used to live like this. She goes, I can't believe this. She goes, look where we are. She goes, you used to live like this all the time? I said, yeah, I used to live like this all the time. That's what I miss, not for my ego, I miss, to have them live that way, have them experience that. And then the tickets, you go in an elevator and you come out and there's a security guard and you show the guy the armband and he opens up the door, you walk out and there's the stage right there. My daughter's like, it was just a great experience, and Michael, Michael hooked it all up like the old days, called so it was cool. So I'm glad she got a chance to experience that. But, my answer to your question basically is I'm content.
Got any regrets?
Yeah, sure. I got regrets. I got regrets of what I did to my sister. I have regrets. I have regrets about all the time I did. I have regrets that I never just stood in school. But do I have any, I lived a big life. I mean, I lived a big life. I lived a big life. It was really good for a while and then it got really bad, so, but at the end of the day, right now I could say that I'm content, I'm happy where I'm at, I mean, financially I struggle now and then, but, the whole country's struggling right now, I'm not a, it took some getting used to becoming like a productive member of society. You know what I mean? It took some getting used to, it's, you know what I mean? Yeah, I'm sure you could identify with that. Yeah. So, but, it's weird now because what happened was, nobody knew who I was, where I lived, for years. I was under an assumed name, and I was a counselor. And it was like, it was weird because, I would be like out at a party and like a Frankie Valli song would come on and I can't like say to the guy next to me, like he used to eat dinner at my house, really like Frankie Valli, or like a David Bowie song would come on. I go, yeah, I snorted coke with him. I hung out with David Bowie, like you hung out with David Bowie, so it was, but now, so now that I'm on social media, now that I have all this stuff going on with the podcast and the shows, and I was on the TV, and now people know who I am. So now it's like, I had to reveal myself to a point. So it's like different now. So some people are laughing about it. Some people are like, whoa. Some people say, what should we call you now? We don't know what to call you by your real name or the name you've been using for the past 7 years, so it's kind of funny.
So you've talked about murders and violence to other people. What about brushes with death that you may have had? What have been your scariest moments?
The scariest moments was, I had guns pointed at me. You know what I mean? I got shot at a couple of times.
Could you give us the backstories for those?
Yeah, well, it was one time coming out of this. We used to hang out in this bar. My friend Sal had a beef with this kid, with this other kid named Sal, and him and I walked out of the bar and the kid was across the street. He started shooting at Sal, but I was with him, so we both had to duck behind cars. Another time I was in a club, and two guys next to me were arguing, and one guy pulled out a gun and he shot the guy in the face. And I was standing right there, and the guy just was staring at me, and I'm staring at him, and I'm going, oh, this fucking guy's going to shoot me. And the guy just put the gun away and he ran out the door. It was kind of scary. One time I had one of the scariest times too was, so my friend Louis, he stabbed this kid on Queens Boulevard years ago in front of this club called the Monastery that this guy from Corona owned, Lenny Mandrapani. He was around Tough Tony, Corona. So they owned a disco on Queens Boulevard, and a fight broke out, and my friend Louis and Carl, they stabbed this kid. And the kid went to the hospital, and then this kid Gregory got in touch with me, who lived on the Lower East Side. He was with his father was a wise guy. His father was Eddie Dolls, that was his nickname. His father was a wise guy with my father's family, the Gambinos. And he knew me, Gregory, who he had later on got murdered too. He came to see me. He goes, listen, these kids want $2,000. Otherwise, they're going to give you, this kid's going to give your friend Louis up. They could stop him. So you want to go see them and give them the money? I go, yeah, I don't want Louis to get arrested. So I don't know if you ever saw that movie, The Gangs in New York. You ever see the movie, The Gangs in New York?
Sure.
The Caprio, you know them tunnels on the Lower East Side? Well, them tunnels are still there.
Yeah,
Still
5
there.
points.
Right, yeah. So I went there, and now they took me in those tunnels, and I'm walking in them tunnels. I'm going, what am I, out of my mind in these tunnels? You know, and they took me in these tunnels, and that's where I met these kids in them tunnels. That was a little scary moment for me. Another scary moment was me to get arrested was Neil's son and his cousin, Sally, had shot somebody. They killed somebody, and they came into a diner in downtown Manhattan, and I was with them, and 2 cops walked into the diner, and Buddy handed me a gun under the table and said, here, hold this. And I took it. I didn't know they just shot somebody with it. And I put it in my pants because the cops didn't know me. They knew him. And I walked out and I got rid of the gun. 2 days later, my father comes downstairs in the basement, because I lived in the basement, and he tells me, what did you do the other night? I go, what are you talking about? He goes, I saw Buddy, and he told me, oh, your son did me a big favor the other night. Is there something wrong with you? I go, what was I supposed to do? Tell him, no, I didn't know he shot somebody with the gun. You know, so that was a little scary. Yeah. But yeah, I had some brushes with that, but, you know, shot at, I got hit with, you know, bottles in the head. One time a guy tried to stab me, and he went to stab me, and the kid, this guy, Sally Minicello, there was a ceramic ashtray on the bar. He hit the guy with the ceramic ashtray, and the guy dropped the knife. We had a big sit down over that. My father had a big sit down with these wise guys from Mulberry Street. Of course, this kid was with one of them, this guy, Doc Philly, Black Phil, they used to call the guy. And we had a big sit down because the kid tried to stab me.
What was the conversation at the sit down like?
That's a good question. The conversation at the sit down was, my father wanted to kill the kid that tried to stab me. And Philly, the guy that was sitting down from me, said, well, he wants to apologize. So he goes, oh, so in other words, if my son was dead in the coffin, he's going to come out up to the coffin and apologize to me. You know, so so the kid wasn't there that tried to stab me, but Philly, the guy that sat down from, wanted to get him to apologize, and my father wouldn't accept the apology. So I never really saw the kid anymore. You know what happened? That was in the early 70s. In 1979, I'm in Art to Kill. This kid rolls into Art to Kill. Scared to death. Now I'm there, scared to death. Because now I'm there, I got the whole place locked up, right? Right. I'm living in a 5-man room with 4 murderers and me. People used to tell me, how do you sleep in that room? I feed them veal cutlets. My father brings them veal cutlets every week. Yeah. I feed them veal cutlet sandwiches. So he was an Italian kid. You know, it was when we were younger. He came up, he apologized. You know, we ended up becoming sort of friends, and and that was the end of it. But that was a big sit down. My father wanted to kill him. And one of my brother's friends actually got murdered. My brother's best friend actually got murdered right in front of my house by the Colombos. And we had a big sit down over that too with Paul Castellano. He had stabbed somebody's son, and they made out, they didn't know who he was, and they killed him in the park across the street from my house. And then we had a big sit down with Paul Castellano, and Paul Castellano told my father that he had to forget about this one. And, it was a whole big thing. And a couple of my friends got shot. 1 died, 2 lived. Anthony Stabile, another wise guy with the Lucchese's, he shot my friend Bobby. My father had a big sit down over that. That's the life. That's what happens out there.
Bruno?
Yeah, Anthony Stabile. You know, the funny thing, you just mentioned Anthony's name. Him and your dad were mentioned in Goodfellas. Did you want to tell Sean about that?
Yeah, so that bar, that scene in Goodfellas was the Bamboo Lounge. That was the name of the bar. My father was very good friends with the Varios my whole life. Like my father, Babe Vario, my father's Paulie's brother Babe was very tight with my father. They went out together all the time with their wives, with my mom and his wife, and very good friends with them. And so my father, when I was a kid, my father used to bring me by Paulie's house in Canarsie, because my father and Paulie always had crap games together in the 60s. They did a lot of business together, my father and Paulie. They were very tight, very tight. And so that was, and when I got older, my father used to take me to the Bamboo Lounge. And it's funny because when that movie came out, so I'm in the movie theater with my friends. And the first time I went to see it, I'm in the movie theater with my friends, and they're panning that crew. And then when they said Fat Andy, all my friends, that's your father, in the middle of the movie theater. And I went, oh, and like everybody, I didn't know, and they screamed like, oh, that's your father. And I said, oh shit, but my father never liked Henry. My father did not like him. And Henry Hill knew my father didn't like him. And my father was actually in jail with Paulie in Missouri. They were in that prison hospital, and we used to go visit them. Me, Tony Lee, Danny Cateo, Pete the Killer, Paulie's son. We all used to fly to Missouri together and go visit them. And my father used to tell Paulie in the visit room, I told you, I never liked that fucking Henry Hill. And Paulie used to go, please don't break my balls. He used to tell my father, please don't stop breaking my balls about Henry. But I knew all of them. When I saw that movie, it was like sort of blew me away because I knew all of them intimately. Tommy DeSimone used to take me out with him. I mean, he would come to my father's bar in Brooklyn, Bulldogs, because he was good friends with this guy, Paulie G, that was with my father. And he would come there to pick Paulie G up, and I would be there. And I was like 18 and 19. And he would tell me, you want to come out with me? And I go, yeah. And he would tell my father, I'm going to take your son with me tonight. And my father's telling him, don't get my son in no trouble. No, what are you kidding me? No. As soon as I got out in the car, he used to pull out, boom, a bag of Coke. Yeah. As soon as I got in his car. It was like crazy. My father, actually, Bobby DeSimone, Tommy's brother, was my father's co-defendant in Florida. They were on the same case together. So I had a very intimate relationship with all of them. And it was sort of like that movie hit home for me because that's how I was. That was like sort of my life too, the Copa. I used to go to the Copa with my father through the basement, through the kitchen, always, with the table. Always went to the Copa. I used to go there on my own with my girlfriends, my wife, my girlfriend at the time. So I was in and out of the Copa. And Jimmy Burke, I dated his daughter Kathy when we were kids. She was like one of my first girlfriends. So it was an experience.
Which leads to the question: how realistic are mafia movies? Do you have some favorites, and are there others that you think are silly?
Well, I think my two favorites are Goodfellas and Casino. I think those are, the Godfather was a great movie, but the end is not realistic. I mean, they're not going to kill it's funny because when the Godfather came out, my father didn't go see it right away. So then one day my father gets up and he says to me, listen, I want to go see the Godfather today, but don't tell nobody. So I call up my two friends, his godson Joey and my friend Sal, and we take him to the theater to see the Godfather for the first time. And we walked out, he goes, that was good, but the end was bullshit. They could never kill all the bosses in one day. So I think Goodfellas is probably the most realistic one. I like Casino. I like The Sopranos. I mean, outside of him he would have got killed. Nobody's going to go see a psychiatrist in that position, any position. Listen, I know for a fact how the mob deals with mental illness. So I'm sure you ever heard of Vito Guzzo? I'm sure you know who Vito Guzzo is, right? The kid that's his father, Vito Sr., was a wise guy with the Colombo family that was very, very tight friends with my father. He had a legitimate nervous breakdown. Back then, nobody knew bipolar. Today, everything has an initial. Back then, nobody knew nothing. They called you crazy, retarded, whatever. Today, so he had a legitimate nervous breakdown. He went into a psych ward. He got out. Matter of fact, when he got out, he came to see my father in the bar. I was there that night. He walked in because his son, Anthony Guzzo, used to stay with me. And he had another nervous breakdown and he went into the psych unit again for the second time. And he came out and he disappeared off the face of the earth. That's how the mob deals with mental illness. So, but The Sopranos had a lot of real stuff in it, like a lot of real stuff in it. They definitely had some street advising them on some stuff, without a doubt. There's a couple of things in there that someone said might have been that someone around my father was telling him, with robbing the poker games and all that shit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of them, like this thing they got on prime time, the Godfather of Harlem. Like that's complete nonsense. I mean, Bumpy Johnson was a gangster in his own right, but with that chintz, that's complete fabrication, bullshit. Matter of fact, I even asked Rita, because I'm friends with Rita Giganti, to Chin's daughter, who did a show with me recently. And I teased her about it. I go, what do you think of the Godfather of Harlem? She goes, oh, please, my sister and I hate that show.
Bruno.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit, Anthony, about your connections in Brooklyn. Did you ever have any dealings with anybody in Sheepshead Bay or downtown Brooklyn?
No, I mean, yeah, we had dice game. Well, I mean, I worked in a lot of dice games where all the families had like stuff to do, you know, downtown Brooklyn. I mean, no, I never really, you know, I stood in Queens. I mean, my businesses were all in Brooklyn, my vending companies, my number business, but they were like in the hood, you know what I mean? But I worked in a lot of crap games with a lot of guys from those neighborhoods, you know, because back then, so the crap games, the crap game, every family had something to do with the crap games. Like the Gambino family was the banker, the Lucchese families were the Shylocks, the Banana family, they booked the money, they booked the numbers, you know. So every crew had guys in there. So I mean, I did business with a lot of people, but not, you know, actually in that neighborhood.
Right.
But we all worked together. We all had our hands in everything. Yeah.
So you mentioned the chin, and some of my favorite Francis stories were about the chin when he was in England here recently.
Yeah.
Have you got any chin stories? Because the British public, you know, they're not that familiar with a lot of this stuff.
I only saw him once. The first time I only saw, my father knew him good. I have once. When Frank Costello got shot in the hallway, all right, and the bullet grazed his head, so. My father got picked up for that shooting. My father got picked up for that shooting, and the chin is the one that actually did it. But my father fit the same description as the chin, you know, short, stocky, dark hair, you know, and they actually took my father to that hallway, the homicide, the detectives, because there was a witness or whatever. And they made my father run up and down that hallway, and then they let him go. So my father's telling me to stop. I just lost you.
Oh, it's all right. Keep going. I got to change my battery.
So my father said they took him in for that homicide, that shooting, because they took him in back then for everything. And they let him go because the chin is the one that did it. And I told my father, after he told me the story, I said, you sure you didn't do it? He goes, no, I didn't do it. I said, what do you mean? He goes, if I did it, he would have been dead. He told me. I said, oh, shit. He goes, I would have never left that hallway if he would. He said, I would have never left that hallway if he was alive. So the first time I saw the chin, my father had to go to the club on Sullivan Street to meet somebody. So I went with him. And we came out of the club and I saw him across the street. He had a robe on and he was talking to somebody. So I told my father, I go, what is that guy standing over there talking to that guy with a robe on? So my father said, that's the chin. I said, that's the chin. And as we're walking to the car, he looked up and he saw my father and he just, you know, nodded to my father, hello. And my father, you know, nodded back to him. And we got in the car and left. I said, that was the chin. He goes, yeah, it was the chin. He walks around with a robe on. He said, he makes out he's crazy. But that's the only time I saw him. My father met him a few times. My father knew him from, you know, when they were younger, you know, from the 50s. My father knew him. But I had some incident. I knew his brother. I had an incident with his brother. I had a wise guy around him threw a punch at me. This guy, Dom DeSailor, John Gotti sent me this. John Gotti had to send this guy money before he was the boss. So he gives me money to bring to, because he asked me if I know the guy. And I said, yeah, I know the guy, Dom DeSailor. So he goes, okay, listen, go to Manhattan to his club and bring him this money. So he made Tony Roach come with me. I don't know if you know who Tony Roach is. He was one of John's guys. So he makes Tony Roach call me. So I go to Sullivan Street and I walk in and the guy's, and he's sitting at the table and he looks up at me and he says, I said, you know, he goes, what are you doing here? I go, John sent me. He goes, John sent you. He goes, you can't talk to me. You're not on my level. I said, listen, I'm not here to talk about levels and because I'm here to give you some money. So I give him the money. It was short. He counts the money. He goes, this is what he sent you? He goes, what's he playing cards? He's too busy to come. He was playing pinochle. He goes, what is he playing cards? He's too busy to come here. I said, I don't know what he's doing. He just, listen, Dom, he sent me here with the money. This is what I'm doing here. I'm not here to debate it. So he takes his glasses off and he throws them at me and they hit me in the chest. And I go, what are you doing? He goes, what am I doing? And he gets up and he goes to like this with his hand and I grab his arm and I twist it behind his back and I put him up against the wall and he's going, and now and I'm going, Dom, don't hit me. Now, Tony Roach is running. He's ready to hit him. And I tell Tony Roach, no, don't hit him. Right. And he's struggling. I go, listen, I'm going to let you go, Dom. Don't hit me, please, because we're going to hurt you. Don't hit me. And I let him go. And he goes, get the fuck out of here. You tell John. And he's ranting and raving. I get in the car. I go back to Ozone Park. I go back to the Burger Fish Club. I walk in, Gotti's, he goes, what happened? I go, what happened? I said, Dom the sailor threw a punch at me. He goes, does he know who you are? Well, yeah, he knows who I am. I met him with my father 10 times. He knows who I am. So then I tell John what happens, right? They get me in a car. They put me in a car. Tony Lee, my father, Tony Lee, Jeannie, Johnny. We get in a car. We go to Manhattan. My father was in Florida. We go to the Ravenite. We walk in. John tells me, tell Neil the story on Neil. I tell Neil the story once, twice, 3 times. I go, Neil, how many times do you want me to tell you the story? The guy threw a punch at me. Neil's going, I can't believe this. John's screaming, I'll start a war over this. Because now he's out of his mind, right? And I'm going, oh my God, right? And now they're all talking. I walk outside to smoke a cigarette. Outside, there's this guy, Mo Chink. That was his name. He was
1 second, guys.
He was an old guy, mob guy, like from the Black Hand days, like old, right? And he's out there and he's smoking a cigarette too. And he looks at me, he goes to me, you know where your father is right now? I go, yeah, he's in Florida. He goes, listen, he goes, go around the corner, call your father and tell him to come right to New York. He goes, and don't go anywhere with anybody unless your father's with you. Anybody, Tony Lee, don't go anywhere with anybody. You understand what I'm telling you? I said, yeah, I get it. I went around the corner to a payphone. I called my father up in Miami. I told him, listen, Dom the sailor threw a punch at me. He goes, what? I'll be on the next flight. Hung up the phone. He goes, get out of Manhattan. Leave, go, get out of Manhattan right now. I go, all right. I got in a cab and I left. I just left. I got in a cab and I went home. We flew in that night and he flew in on Eastern Airlines. I picked him up that night. The next day we went to the Ravenite. And then John, my father, and Tony Lee went back to the club on Sullivan Street and they sat down with the Chin's brother and Dom the sailor. And Dom the sailor told a whole different story. And my father told him, that's not what happened. He goes, so Dom the sailor says, what are you calling me, a liar? He goes, yeah. He goes, yeah. He goes, and I'm going to tell you another thing. If you ever put your hands on my son again, I'm going to put you right through the ground. He told him, you understand what I'm telling you? He goes, remember one thing, I'm not a politician. He goes, I'm a gangster. He went like this. He took his tie and he went, I'm not a politician. I'm a gangster. Use politic, because now they're politicking about what's transpired. He goes, I'm not a politician. I'm a gangster. He goes, I'm not. So the next time you disrespect me or my family, I'm going to put you right through the ground. And he told Tony, now let's go. And we got up and we walked out and we left John there with them. And we walked out and we got in the car and we left. We went back to the Ravenite. We walked in the Ravenite. Neil said, where's John? He goes to my father, what'd you do? He goes, what did I do? I told them I'm not a politician. I'm a gangster. They want to politic. They could politic all they want. I don't want no apologies. I don't want to know nothing. Just make sure my son don't get hurt. And that's the end of it. And then John came back and he goes, what the fuck did you do? He said, you know, and then they just laughed it off, but they straightened it all out. But it was scary. That was a little scary for a minute because, you know, my father was out of town and, you know, now there's all wise guys involved and captains and underbosses. And, You know, I know the protocol. This guy's a wise guy. Even though he threw a punch at me, I put my hands on him. You know what I mean? Like, so, and he, it was like, and then I got the Genovese family, which is powerful, and the Gambino family, and I'm in the middle of these two monsters. You know what I mean? Like, that was a little scary, especially when Mo Chink, the old man, told me not to go with nobody. You know, he told me not to go with anybody, even Tony Lee. That was kind of that made me a little nervous when he told me not even to go with Tony Lee.
Wow, this has been absolutely fascinating. We've just got about 10 minutes left. What's your thoughts on Joe Bonanno Sr.? And did you have any dealings with those guys?
Joe Bonanno Sr., the guy with my thoughts is he's the one that he roomed us with that book, with that Rico. He roomed us. I mean, what he did with that book. I mean, look at all that book was, they made the commission case out of the book. I never had any dealings with him. I mean, I had dealings with guys in his family, like Joe Messina, I was good friends with. He became the boss of the Bonanno family. I was good friends with Joe Messina. I had a lot of conversations with him. I was good friends with Sarah. He was a captain in the Bonanno family. So I had dealings with a lot of guys that were in the Bonanno family, but the old man, I never knew him. But I know people that came after him. Philip Rusty, he was good friends with my father. He was the boss before Joe Messina. But the biggest relationship I had out of with any of the Bonannos probably was with Joe Messina, because I knew him since I was a kid.
So do you think that fall of the Italian Mafia in America was exacerbated by Gotti putting everybody on Front Street, as you said earlier?
Yeah, I think it started when probably after the books were open in the 70s. I mean, they started straightening out a lot of guys that weren't even criminals. I mean, you're straightening out guys that never went to prison, they weren't even criminals. They were legitimate guys. They were just big earners, you know what I mean? And they got to get straightened out. And then guys were dealing drugs. They were getting thousands of years. Then they developed the witness protection program where now you're going to be protected, you're going to get supported, you're going to get picked, you know what I mean? So the world started changing, and then John put everybody on Front Street, so that started a lot of investigation. I mean, the Gambino family had captains that they didn't even know who they were, and John made them come to the Raven Night once a week. So so he put everybody on Front Street. So that was the end of it. And he put it out. He put it on the front page. But I think it started to crumble before John. He just was the final straw.
So what is the presence of the Italian Mafia in modern day America?
I think it's kind of pretty much over. I mean, it's not like it was. It's not, my father, the last conversation I had with my father before he passed away, I was in Elmira. It was in 1998. He came to visit me in 1998 before he died. He died in 99. I'll never forget. And we're sitting in the visiting room, and he comes to visit me. And he goes, "Listen, I'm opening up import export with a big warehouse. We're going to sell fruit and vegetables." So I looked at him. He goes, I'm partners with this kid in Philadelphia, because he was good friends with Joey Molina, the boss of Philly. And they had a big produce business in Philadelphia. And he met them all in prison, this kid, Billy, and they were going to open up this big produce company. He goes, "I'm opening up a big produce company with Billy and Joe and Joey Molina, and it's for you when you come home." I said, "It's for me when I come home? What are you talking about?" He goes, "Our life is over." I said, "What are you talking about? Why is it over?" He goes, "Because the two things we had going for us are finished." I said, "What's that?" He goes, "Everybody feared us and nobody cooperated." He goes, "Nobody fears us anymore and people are cooperating." He goes, "It's over." And he was right. It's over. So I was going to go into the fruit and vegetable business, but he passed away on me, so that never transpired. Yeah.
So do you think the rise of the cartels contributed to that? They took control of most organized crime?
I think that, and a lot of in New York City, there's a lot of ethnic groups that are making money. Like a lot of, like you got the Russian mob, you got the Albanians, you got the Dominicans, you got the Colombians. I mean, I did business with a lot of them with my vending company. I had vending machines in a lot of Dominican after-hour clubs and, Colombian after-hour clubs. And the Russians, it's a very competitive now, very competitive because of all these different ethnic groups. And it's a different geographic, it's different. And the mob is not killing nobody no more. How are you going to kill somebody? There's cameras everywhere. There's cameras and doorbells. The world is different. I tell people, like, I wouldn't even know how to make money today in the street. The way I made money in the street would be impossible to do today. With all the technology and the cameras and the surveillance and the internet, it would be impossible. To be a bookmaker when I was a kid, you had to rent it was a whole big process. Today, you get a website and you're a bookmaker. Today, you get a website and you're a bookmaker. So, yeah, I think a lot of things contributed to the downfall of the mob, but I think the biggest thing right now is the lack of violence. Like, even for guys like me and Sammy, people know where we are. I'm not telling them to come get me. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I still look at, make sure, I know, but I mean, nobody's coming after me. I'm not saying there's nobody out there that's capable of it. There's people capable of committing murders, don't get me wrong, but who's going to send them? How are they going to do it? What are they going to get, an invisible, one of them things you put over you that makes you invisible, like on TV, how are you going to do it? So it's just a different world.
So we like to finish with some advice to young people. So, for example, if you're a young man and you've watched Casino or Goodfellas and you think, right, I aspire to that, what do you say to these kids?
I say to them, all that glitters isn't gold. And at the end of the day, it's fun for a minute. And then at the end of the day, it's not fun. I say, I know the biggest gangsters in the world. I knew John Gotti and my father. To me, they were the two biggest gangsters in the world. John Gotti died chained to a bed in prison, and my father died in the street alone and broke. After doing 13 years in prison, he got out. He had no family, no friends. He was all alone. So, I spent 14 years in prison. It's all that glitters isn't gold. It looks good, but it's, at the end of the day, it's not. Your family suffers. My daughter was 3 years old when I went to prison. She was 11. My son was 13. When I came out, he was 21. My son has been visiting someone in prison his whole life. There's collateral damage to our lifestyles that you have to take into effect. It affects people. My lifestyle affected people.
All right, well said. Can you let the viewers know where they can find you, support you, watch you on YouTube, watch your podcasts?
Yes, my podcast is reformedgangsters.com, and I also have a website, anthonyruggiano.com. Please go on my podcast and subscribe on my YouTube channel, reformedgangsters.com.
Yeah, and
videos on there.
On the YouTube version of this, we'll put all your links in the video below it in the description box for people to click on. Is there anything you want to say into conclusion to the people watching?
It was really a pleasure. I enjoyed, speaking to everybody. I hope someone heard my message that, listen, that lifestyle is good. And then at the end of the day, it's not so good. Maybe we reached out to somebody, maybe we could change somebody's mind, save somebody. And it was a pleasure.
Oh, same here, brother. Thank you for spending time with us. So please let us know in the comments what you thought about this video. Check out all the links to support Anthony. And don't forget to check him out also on Michael Francese's channel, as it was Michael who highly recommended Anthony come on this channel. So shout out to Michael Francese as well for the recommendation. Cheers, Michael. Thank you. So if you enjoy true crime books, Gadfly Press is proud to announce the publication of Son of the Cali Cartel. You may have seen the Cali Cartel as represented on Narcos. A lot of that was BS. William lays it down in this book, what actually happened. The Cali Cartel, they took over from Pablo Escobar. They were the biggest cartel in the world, dealing billions and billions per year, US dollars. And the four heads out of the two most important ones were Miguel, which was William's dad, and his brother, Gilberto. When Miguel went to prison and Gilberto went to prison, William was running the cartel. Could you imagine running a multi-billion-dollar cartel? And the DEA, war on drugs, they made them public enemy number one. William got shot up in an assassination attempt in a restaurant. The book starts out with that story. His mates got murdered and he just barely made it out alive. So if you want to check it out, it's available worldwide on Amazon as an ebook audiobook and paperback. And the link is in the description box below this video. Cheers. Enjoy the podcast.